Do you know what's funny? My father said as he stood up and raised his wine glass during my engagement dinner. We actually tried to get rid of you years ago, but it was too expensive. For a second, the room went completely silent. Then a few people laughed nervously. Others looked down at their plates. Nobody seemed sure how to react. I sat frozen in my chair. My fiancé, Callan Mercer, looked at my father in disbelief. The smile disappeared from his face. I felt my stomach twist into a knot as everyone waited for me to laugh along with the joke, but I couldn't. My father, Dorian Hart, simply chuckled and took a sip of his drink as if he had said something harmless. My mother, Meredith, avoided looking at me. She stared at the table and remained silent. I had spent my whole life feeling different from the rest of my family. They were never openly cruel, but I always felt like I didn't belong. Growing up, I often wondered why I seemed to be treated differently. Whenever I asked questions, I was told I was imagining things. Now, sitting at my own engagement celebration, those old feelings came rushing back. I looked around the table and noticed something strange. My grandmother, Eloan Hart, wasn't laughing. In fact, she looked terrified. Her face had turned pale, and her hands were shaking slightly. She kept staring at my father as if he had just revealed something he should never have said. The rest of the evening felt uncomfortable. People tried changing the subject, but the damage had already been done. My father's words kept replaying in my mind. When the dinner finally ended, guests slowly began leaving the restaurant. As Callan spoke with some relatives near the entrance, I saw my grandmother quietly walking toward the parking lot alone. I followed her outside. Just before getting into her car, she reached into her purse and pulled out an old brass key. She pressed it into my hand and looked directly into my eyes. "Your father never wanted you asking questions," she whispered. "Now it's time you do." Before I could ask what she meant, she got into her car and drove away, leaving me standing there with the key in my hand and 1,000 questions running through my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about the brass key. It stayed in my drawer, but it felt like it was sitting in my mind all the time, reminding me of my grandmother's warning. After 3 days, I finally made a decision. I told Callan I needed some space and drove to my grandmother Eloan's house while she was away for a medical appointment. I knew she kept an old attic no one ever used anymore. The house was quiet when I arrived. Every step inside felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was holding secrets. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, my hands shaking slightly as I held the key. The attic door creaked open. Dust filled the air. Old furniture, covered in white sheets, stood like shadows. I moved carefully, searching until I found a small wooden box pushed deep behind an old trunk. It looked old and locked, just like she said. My heart was beating fast as I used the brass key. It fit perfectly. The lock clicked open. Inside, there were folded papers, yellow with age. Newspaper clippings, carefully kept for years. The first one caught my attention immediately. It talked about a missing child named Aurora Sinclair. She was only 5 years old when she disappeared during a charity gala. The name Sinclair sounded familiar. I had heard it somewhere, but I couldn't remember where. I read more clippings with growing fear. The articles described how Aurora came from one of the richest families in the state. There were photos from the event, crowds of guests, and search efforts that went on for years. My hand stopped when I saw the photographs at the bottom of the box. It was a picture of a little girl, smiling faintly at the camera. I stared at her face, unable to breathe properly. She looked exactly like me. Same eyes. Same face shape. Even the small mark near her eyebrow matched something I had seen in the mirror my whole life. I stepped back, holding the photo tightly. My mind started racing, trying to understand what I was seeing. My father's strange joke at dinner suddenly came back to me, but now it didn't feel like a joke anymore. For the first time, I felt something deeper and more frightening. It felt like my life was built on a truth I had never been told. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The next morning, I walked straight to my parents and placed the newspaper clippings on the table. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Who is Aurora Sinclair?" I asked. The moment they saw the papers, everything changed. My father's face hardened instantly. My mother's eyes widened, then she quickly looked away. For a second, no one spoke. The silence felt heavy, like the air had been taken out of the room. Then my father stood up. "You had no right to go through that box," Dorian said sharply. His voice was louder than I had ever heard before. I told him I only wanted answers. I reminded him of the photo, of the girl who looked exactly like me. But instead of explaining, he slammed his hand on the table. "Stop this nonsense. You're imagining things. Put everything back where you found it." My mother finally spoke, but her voice was weak. "Serafina, please, just forget about it. Forget about it." That made my chest tighten even more. The way they reacted didn't feel like confusion. It felt like fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the name Sinclair. I searched it again and again, going deeper each time. Hours passed, and I found more reports, more old documents, more missing child appeals. Aurora Sinclair had disappeared years ago from a charity gala. Her family had never stopped looking for her. There were interviews, police reports, even private investigators hired across different states. They had spent millions trying to find her. But something didn't make sense. My name never appeared anywhere in their records. Not once. It was like I had been completely erased from every search, every file, every mention. I kept digging, my heart racing harder with every page I found. Someone had made sure there was no connection between me and that missing girl. Every trail stopped cold, like it had been carefully covered up. By morning, I was no longer confused. I was sure of one thing. Whatever my parents were hiding, it wasn't small. I told myself I needed answers, not fear. That's why I agreed to attend the charity event linked to the Sinclair Family Foundation. I dressed carefully, trying to act normal, even though my mind was far from calm. The hall was full of people in expensive clothes, soft music playing in the background. Everything felt too polished, too perfect, like a world I didn't belong in. I was standing near a display table when I noticed an elderly woman walking toward me. She stopped suddenly a few steps away. Her face changed the moment she looked at me. She froze. Her hand started shaking slightly, and her lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't find words. "Excuse me," she finally said in a low voice, still staring at me. There was something strange in the way she looked at my face, like she was seeing a ghost. She took a small step closer. "What is your name?" "Serafina Hart," I replied. The moment I said it, her eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth with one hand, shaking her head slowly. "No, this can't be." People around us started noticing, but she didn't care. She reached out and gently touched my arm, as if checking I was real. "My name is Celeste Sinclair," she said. "I am Aurora's aunt." My heart dropped at the name. Before I could respond, she looked closely at me again, her eyes locking onto something near my ear. She slowly moved a little of my hair aside. Her expression changed again. "You have it," she whispered. I didn't understand. "Have what?" She pointed at a small birthmark behind my ear. "That mark, it runs in our family. Aurora had it too. My sister had it. I've seen it my whole life." My breath caught in my throat. Celeste stepped back like she needed air. She looked overwhelmed, like everything she believed was breaking in front of her. Then she spoke again, softer this time. "Please, you need a DNA test. Just to be sure." I didn't answer right away. For the first time since this began, I wasn't just curious or confused. I was scared. Because something in her voice made it sound like she already knew the answer. Weeks passed after that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about Celeste's words. In the end, I agreed to take the DNA test. I told myself it would close the chapter, that it would prove everything was just a strange coincidence. The envelope arrived on a quiet afternoon. My hand shook as I held it. I didn't open it right away. I just sat on my bed, staring at it, feeling like whatever was inside had the power to change everything. When I finally opened it, my eyes moved across the page quickly. My breath stopped. It said I was not adopted. My heart pounded harder as I kept reading, trying to understand what I was seeing. But the next line made my body go cold. The truth was not what I expected. I was Aurora Sinclair. The report confirmed I was the biological daughter of Roman Sinclair and Vivian Sinclair. I had heard those names before in news articles. They were one of the richest families in the country, powerful, known, and always in the public eye. I had read about them without ever thinking they could be connected to me. My hand started shaking so badly I dropped the paper on the floor. It didn't feel real. I kept repeating the words in my head, hoping I had read them wrong, but the result didn't change. I wasn't who I thought I was. I was someone else. Someone who had been lost. The silence in my apartment suddenly felt heavier than before. Even the smallest sound made me jump. I didn't know what to do next. Callan tried calling me, but I didn't answer. Then something worse happened. Late that night, I heard a noise near my door. At first, I thought it was just the building settling. But then I heard footsteps inside my apartment. I slowly stood up, my heart racing. The living room light was off, but I could see movement. Someone was inside. Drawers were being opened. Papers were being moved. My things were being searched. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Whoever it was wasn't there by accident. They were looking for something. And I knew exactly what. I went straight to my grandmother alone after what happened. I didn't call first. I just arrived at her house, my hands still shaking from everything I had learned. She opened the door and immediately knew something was wrong. We sat in her small living room without speaking for a moment. I placed everything I had found on the table. The DNA report, the Sinclair documents, everything. Her face changed as she looked at it all. She closed her eyes for a second, like she had been waiting for this day for a very long time. I can't keep carrying this alone anymore, she said quietly. For the first time, her voice sounded tired, not strong like before. She told me to sit closer. Then she started speaking, slowly, like every word hurt her. When you were 5, your father brought you home one night. He said he found you abandoned near a service road. He made it sound like he was helping you. I listened, barely blinking. But I never believed him, she continued. Something about the story didn't feel right. She stood up and walked to a locked drawer in her cabinet. From it, she pulled out a thick folder that looked old and worn from being opened many times. I started checking things myself, she said. Inside the folder were copies of documents, hospital records, and bank slips. Some papers looked altered, like someone had tried to change details after they were written. Every time I asked your father about it, she added, he would get angry. He told me I was imagining things. Then he warned me to stop or I would lose access to the family completely. Her hands were shaking slightly as she placed the folder in front of me. I couldn't stop, she whispered. I kept collecting proof quietly. 4 years. I flipped through the pages slowly, my chest tightening more with every document I saw. Then she said something that made me stop completely. I think your father didn't just find you, Serafina, he knew exactly where you came from. The folder my grandmother gave me changed everything I thought I knew. After that night, investigators were finally brought in again, and I stayed close, answering every question they asked. At first, they treated it like a missing identity case. But soon, they started finding things that made the situation darker. Old financial records began to surface. Payments made years ago. Strange transfers that didn't match any normal family expenses. My father's name appeared more than once in private records that were never meant to be public. One investigator asked me to sit down before showing me anything else. He looked serious, like he had already made a conclusion but didn't want to say it too quickly. Then he placed the documents in front of me. I saw dates going back years. Attempts. Not just one, but several. My father, Dorian, had tried to place me into foster care more than once. Each attempt had failed. Not because he stopped trying, but because something always blocked it. Legal checks. Background issues. Risks that could expose him. The investigator explained it slowly, watching my reaction carefully. If this had gone through, he said, a lot of things would have come out. Things he couldn't allow. I felt my throat tighten as I kept reading. Every failed attempt had a cost. Every delay made the situation more complicated for him. And then I saw the line that made everything stop in my mind. Keeping me was cheaper than getting rid of me the right way. Not just cheaper in money, but cheaper in risk. That's when the memory of his voice came back to me. At my engagement dinner. His laugh. His words. We tried to get rid of you years ago, but it was too expensive. It wasn't a joke. It was the truth he had been hiding in front of everyone. I felt sick as I understood it fully. I wasn't unwanted by accident. I was kept because removing me would have exposed something far worse. The betrayal didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like my entire life had been controlled by fear and calculation from the very beginning. After seeing the records, everything moved faster. Investigators stopped treating it like a small family issue. Now it was a full case again, and new names started appearing in the files. One of the first breakthroughs came from old bank records. Hidden payments were traced back to a private security contractor who had worked at the same charity gala where everything originally happened years ago. His name had been erased from most reports, but not completely. When investigators brought him in, he didn't deny everything. He stayed quiet at first, then finally spoke after hours of questioning. He admitted he had been paid by someone connected to my father, Dorian Hart. Not just once, but multiple times over the years. His job had been to adjust records, remove traces, and make sure certain details never reached official reports. The more he talked, the heavier the truth became. Then more people started coming forward. A former staff member from the event spoke about missing files and altered guest lists. Another witness remembered being told to forget certain names after the gala ended. Piece by piece, the story started building itself again, even after all these years. I listened to everything with a strange feeling in my chest. It didn't feel like discovery anymore. It felt like watching a wall slowly fall apart. And then something even worse happened inside my family. My father and mother began turning on each other. At first, it was small arguments. Denials. Blaming memory. Saying things were misunderstood. But as more evidence came out, those arguments turned into open fights. Dorian said Meredith knew more than she admitted. Meredith said she was only following his decisions. The image of a perfect couple started breaking in front of everyone involved. While all this was happening, I was taken to meet the Sinclair family. Roman and Vivian Sinclair were waiting in a private room when I arrived. I didn't know what to expect, but the moment I saw them, something inside me shifted. Vivian cried before she even spoke. Roman stood still for a moment, like he was afraid I might disappear again if he moved too quickly. They told me stories about a little girl who vanished from their lives years ago. They showed me old photos, toys they had kept, and rooms that had never been changed. It was overwhelming. I felt like I was standing between two lives at the same time. One life that had raised me, and one that had never stopped looking for me. The reunion was emotional, but it couldn't erase the years that were gone. It couldn't fix the empty space-time had created. Still, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't standing in the middle of a lie. I was finally close to the truth. The deeper the investigation went, the more the truth stopped looking like a family secret and started looking like a planned operation. I was no longer just reading files. I was watching a long chain of decisions unfold on paper. One evening, the lead investigator called me into his office. His expression told me before he even spoke that something big had changed. "We found the missing link," he said. He placed a new folder in front of me. Inside were records that connected names I had never heard before, business deals from years ago, and legal disputes between powerful people connected to the Sinclair family. That's when everything shifted again. It wasn't only my father involved. A former business associate of Roman Sinclair had been part of it from the beginning. A man named Victor Hale. He had been in a bitter financial fight with Roman years ago, and according to the records, that conflict turned into something far darker than money. The documents showed that Aurora's disappearance was not random. It was planned during that dispute, using a child as leverage to gain control in a business war that had gotten out of hand. My hands went cold as I read line after line. At some point, things had stopped being controlled. The plan had gone wrong. And instead of fixing it, people made new choices to protect themselves. That's where my father came in. Dorian Hart hadn't started it, but he had helped bury it. The files showed payments, signed agreements, and secret transfers. When pressure started building years later, he accepted money to make sure my identity stayed hidden. Not to solve the problem. To protect himself. To stay safe while someone else's daughter remained lost. The investigator didn't need to explain much after that. Everything was already clear on my face. I felt like the ground under me had disappeared. This wasn't just about lies anymore. It was about people choosing themselves over a child's entire life. Within days, arrests began. One by one, names from the files were taken in for questioning. Victor Hale was detained first. Then others connected to the old financial network. Even people who thought they were safe started getting pulled into it. My father and mother were called in separately. The silence between them turned into accusations as everything they had hidden started falling apart in public view. News of the case spread quickly through legal circles. Contracts were reviewed, accounts frozen, reputations collapsing under the weight of long-hidden actions finally coming to light. For the first time, there was no confusion left. Only truth. And for those responsible, there was no place left to hide from it. Months passed before everything finally reached court. The trial was long, tense, and filled with documents, witnesses, and voices from the past that had stayed silent for years. Every piece of evidence was brought forward again, bank records, altered reports, statements from people who had finally decided to speak. My grandmother alone sat behind me every day. She never left my side once the hearings began. Dorian Hart walked into court looking like a different man. The confidence he once carried was gone. Meredith avoided looking at me at all. The same people who once controlled every part of my life now sat in silence while their actions were read out loud in front of strangers. Each testimony added another layer to the truth. There was no confusion anymore. No gaps left to hide in. Everything they had buried for years was now out in the open. I was asked to speak too. Standing in that courtroom felt unreal. My voice shook at first, but I forced myself to tell the truth about everything I had lived through, from the engagement dinner to the discovery of the files, all the way to what I had learned about my identity. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then the judge began reading the final findings. Every lie was confirmed. Every hidden action was exposed. Years of deception were written into official record, leaving no space for denial or escape. I remember thinking back to that night at my engagement dinner. My father's laugh. His words that made everyone uncomfortable but nobody questioned at the time. Now those same words felt completely different. What he called a joke had become the beginning of his downfall. After the trial ended, everything changed quickly. Legal papers were filed, names were corrected, and my identity was officially restored. I was no longer Serafina Hart in the system. I was recognized as Aurora Sinclair. It didn't feel like a sudden transformation. It felt like something returning that had been missing for a long time. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life. I stayed close to Kellen, who never once walked away from me through everything. At the same time, I began learning about the Sinclair family, people who had spent years searching for me without giving up. There were no perfect endings. No way to erase the years that were lost. But there was justice. The people who once controlled my story lost everything they built on lies. And I finally understood something I had never been able to believe before. No matter how deep the truth is buried, it always comes back to the surface in the end.